Hello, Shawn. My name is Brandon. I'm sending in this video as a response to your call for people to tell their stories, people who love Jesus and have found their way to Him past, I think, past institutional sort of churches. And so I wanted to do that. Before I begin, I wanted to give you some encouragement, let you know I've been a long-time fan. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I began watching your videos honestly out of entertainment and curiosity. I was trying to learn more about Mormonism, and perhaps I was going about it the wrong way. I went to the anti-Mormon sources or so, but I found it very entertaining at the time, and I just kept watching. And I think that in no small way, your show has helped me in understanding my relationship with an institutional church. So thank you for that. In fact, we corresponded a little bit a few years ago. I was sending you quotes from Alexander Campbell, who was a contemporary of Joseph Smith, and in fact wrote his review of the Book of Mormon, I think in February of 1831. So pretty early on, some people were troubled by this new movement that was going on, and people were leaving churches and joining, and they asked him to respond to the Book of Mormon, and he read it very carefully and wrote his response. I think it's a brilliant take. He's very harsh on the Book of Mormon, and so I always thought that was interesting, that the only two people I really heard being very harsh and just in a direct way was you and Alexander Campbell. So I saw a similarity there. I just want to thank you for the time you put into to the show and for the sacrifices you've made for your beliefs. I want to encourage you in your search for the truth and your search to find just a simple relationship with God, an understanding of who God is through Jesus and through the Scriptures. I think you and I might disagree on some things, but I don't hold any of those things to as evidence that you're not my brother. And so appreciate it. A lot of things you say are things that I would like to say as well. To give you my story, I grew up in the Church of Christ. You might know this or you might not, but if you look up Church of Christ doctrine, if you look up what do Church of Christ members believe, a lot of times you're going to get the very cult-like Churches of Christ in understanding. I think the website, What Does the Bible Say, or Bible Answers, or Got Questions, whatever it's called, they had a pretty balanced review in saying that you never know what you're going to get when it comes to a Church of Christ. It's a non-denominational denomination. I mean, there are lots of similarities between Churches of Christ and how they view things, but at the same time, each church is completely different, and they go their own direction. The way I would put it is that there are two types, basic types of churches, and really you could split it up into different ways. But my way would be, there are those churches who focus on the church, who focus on the Church of Christ, and who focus on it being the biblical church and it being the salvation. They focus on, of course, salvation through Jesus, but on very distinct, of course, ordinances and things like that he put into place, and how easy it is to go into heresy and apostasy and things like that, and how easily someone is separated from Jesus for not directly following the Bible and interpreting things the way they do. There's another world of the Church of Christ which really is Jesus focused. Really don't take themselves very seriously as a church. They want to be Christians only. In fact, that's one of the things that they say is we're not the only Christians, but we seek to be Christians only. And they find themselves within the greater Catholic universal body of Christ, and as one sort of type of body in there, and in fact they might even say, yes, there are ways in which we might need to separate ourselves as far as worship goes because of differences, but that doesn't make us separate. And Of course, some of those churches, not to go into too much of a tangent, but some of those churches have just dropped the of Christ from their names. For instance, Max Lucado's church in Oakland, Oak Hills, I think Texas, who at one time was the Church of Christ, and then eventually just said, "Look, we're really not hung up on the name. Let's just drop the of Christ here and just become the Oak Hills Church." So, but a lot of us have kept the name. But I'd like to say that I grew up in the latter church, but in fact, that's not really true. For the first 8 years or so of my life, I grew up in the former, in a Church of Christ that was very, very strict. They focused on them being the true church. They focused on other denominations being false, and because they're false, their salvation was always questioned. I don't know if it was outright denied, but the idea that somebody could be saved and not be baptized at the right time for the right reasons and the right method, without the right words being said, without the correct confession being given beforehand, that was very questionable whether someone could be saved. Unless those sort of things were put into place. It was very questionable whether someone could be truly a Christian if they weren't observing the Lord's Supper every week, and in doing so have, of course, unfermented fruit of the vine and unleavened bread in their observance. And I'll say one thing, even though that was, I would say, a toxic environment as far as my spirituality went, it was a very positive environment for learning the Bible. If there's one thing that the Church of Christ has been very keen on, it's been teaching the Bible and memorizing the Bible. I remember being 6 or 7 years old and learning to be able to say the books of the Bible, all 66, in order. Being able to, it was very important that we were able to find books very quickly, because if somebody was going to challenge us and say, well, Psalm whatever says this, we had to find it really quickly to be able to look to see, does Psalm whatever really say that? And also just memory verses. I don't think a person that goes to a mainstream sort of church can really understand the level of memory verses that a Church of Christ kid is supposed to learn. It's just incredible. But I think it was good to learn those things. But I would say that we left at that church when I was 8 because we moved. And we went to another church that was a little bit more mainstream. And so it was a good middle ground. My mother was always someone who didn't let us go to other churches. We weren't allowed to visit friends' churches because she just wasn't too sure that we would learn everything. She wanted to protect us. She wanted us to learn correct, sound doctrine first before we went off to learn other things. And it was true. Whenever I did end up going to another person's church, I always questioned everything they did. I remember once going to a church and they said, we're going to say a prayer and we want to see every head bowed and every eye closed. I remember just thinking, where is that in the Bible? You got to close your eyes and bow your head to pray. That didn't make any sense to me. But anyway, that's one thing that a Church of Christ person will always default to is, well, where's that in the Bible? Where am I? What am I supposed to do with that? And so it's very easy for us to question whether something is going on, because we're taught to say, is that in the Bible? Does the Bible say that? Is this person speaking as the oracles of God? So anyway, just to say, I was baptized when I was 12. I remember thinking that I knew I had sin in my life, and I knew I needed to be in a good relationship with Jesus, and I wanted that sin washed away, and I wanted to experience and be a part of that saving church. So I was baptized when I was 12, and I tried very hard to be a good Christian from that time. I tried to read my Bible. I was very strict with myself as far as prayer went, as far as reading the Bible went. I try to read it all the time. I wrote my notes, my commentaries on the Bible. We're talking about a 14, 15-year-old. Our church was very big on young people participating in the worship services and stuff. And in fact, I read scripture and I led songs and I would give sermons. I gave plenty of sermons before I was 18. I don't know how many, probably 6 or 7 sermons in my teenage years. Because that's just the way our church was, and I really wanted to do it, and I worked very hard at it. But at the same time, it was all a very big chore. Praying was a big chore for me. I tried to pray every day. I tried to pray before I went to bed. I tried to pray at every opportunity, and yet it was always this chore that was always on me, and I didn't really know any other way. About when I was 19 or so, I began falling away, not from going to church, not from calling myself a Christian. I still went to church. I still called myself a Christian, but all the things all the words like God and Jesus and salvation, and these words began to mean nothing to me. I began to be what I would call now very dead inside. I still went to church, but at the same time, I was still doing everything I wanted to do. I was doing plenty of drugs at the time. I was doing more and more at the time. And I didn't really drink very much, but hey, I didn't have a big problem with drinking. I just didn't like the way it made me feel the next day. So I would drink sometimes and drink to excess. And so as this went on, I really lost touch with what was happening at church. I would just go and I think I would just stare at the wall. I'm not really sure what I would do. I might sing the songs, but I wasn't participating. I might listen to the sermon, but I didn't hear anything. I think I was deaf and I was blind and I was unable to really do anything. And I'll tell this story if it's interesting to you at all. But one night I was on a drug called LSA, which is a natural drug which LSD is derived from, and I was tripping, I think mildly, but I was still tripping, and I was watching The Big Lebowski for the first time. And as I'm watching it, God started speaking to me. I know that's really strange. He wasn't directly speaking to me, but he was helping me understand this movie in maybe a different way than other people were watching it. And so I began watching this, and I began seeing that, the dude here is sort of representing Jesus, and Walter is sort of representing all the anger that I have inside of me and all the rage that I have. But Donnie is representing my outward appearance. He's representing how I actually am to the world. So I have all this anger inside of me, and I kind of have Jesus there inside of me as well. But really my outward appearance is Donnie, and he's the one who doesn't know where he's at and keeps wandering into conversations and he doesn't know what's going on. He's always very confused so really the relationship between the dude and Walter was sort of an internal discussion. And I don't know if anyone else has ever seen The Big Lebowski like that. And I'm not sure if that was supposed to be like that. But that's how I was viewing it. And as it was going on, I began to sort of wake up inside. I started feeling emotions. I started questioning things. And I started getting this really haunting feeling that God might be real, that Jesus might be real, that all these things that I've believed for all these years might actually be true. And so as the movie went on, some crazy things happened. Well, first, Donnie dies, and then so I kind of felt like I was dying, and then they go to spread his ashes, and the wind blows the ashes onto the dude's face, and I just sort of thought, man, is this supposed to mean I'm supposed to die and let Jesus carry me, and let Jesus carry my ashes? And so I didn't know of it, so I thought maybe this is all just not true. And then at the end, Sam Elliott's character on there, he's some sort of angel, like speaking from the bar, and he said, oh, there's the dude saving all us sinners. And I just thought, what? Did I really hear that? Was this movie really saying this to me? And then after that, I had this sort of moment when I began praying. As the movie ended, I found myself praying, and I was directly speaking to God, and it felt like God was listening. and directly there with me as I was praying. It was an incredible experience. I kept like thinking, well, I'm on drugs right now, so what's going to happen in the morning? But I felt all of these emotions. I felt things, and I'd been doing drugs for a long time, so I could tell the difference. This was a real experience. This was not drugs talking. And the next day, as the drugs were obviously worn off, as the effects of the chemicals were subsiding, my spirit was still awakened. I was still praying to God. He was still listening. There was still a connection there that I couldn't explain. It was a connection that no matter how hard I would have tried to pray in my teenage years, growing up, I wouldn't have been able to make that kind of a connection. I mean, no matter how hard I worked at, I would never say I was working at my salvation, but I was trying to do the things I should do. But it was God who woke me up in that time. And now it's been 10 years since that time. I would like to say that I gave up, all the drugs and everything all at once, and that's not true. It came off slowly. I quit cigarettes. I quit weed. I quit hallucinogens pretty quickly. But that was a process, and I don't look down on anyone who's still in that process. I think that I wouldn't recommend like a diagnosis, like, well, you can't hear God. Well, then go do some drugs, and then you'll hear God. In fact, I've heard lots of people talk about how they also. I tell this story to some people, and they say, "Well, I talked to God once when I was I saw God once when I was on drugs, but He was gone when I woke up." And the next day, and I say, He just wasn't gone for me. It's been 10 years, and my relationship with God is insanely more closer now than it was in that experience, even though that experience blew me away. All these things began making sense. All these things about, I once was blind, and now I see, that Jesus gives a word to those who hear. And all these things started making sense, that the Bible had always said. They now meant something to me in a very personal way. And so I went back to church, and thinking that I was going to bring this with me. I was going to say, "Hey, everyone, look at this." And I found that there were already people there who seemed to already be experiencing Jesus. I didn't know it. I didn't see them before. Not that I can look at one person and say, "Well, you definitely experienced Jesus," and this other person say, "You definitely haven't experienced Jesus." I can't do that, but I could definitely tell that there was a spirit within certain people that it was there all along. I just couldn't see it before. They were there, and so it was all of a sudden I found myself being able to worship, but I still had a lot of things in me that were left over. I still had a lot of issues with being a Church of Christ member, and not being able to worship with other people. So I pushed myself. I pushed myself pretty hard, I'd say. I tried to meet with other Christians from, at this point, from college. And by the way, this all happened when I was 20, or probably late 21, early 22. It's hard to pinpoint the date as far as how old I was. So there was a good 2 or 3 years there where I was completely dead inside. And so I'd been awakened here. I was trying to find other Christians, and I decided that I was going to try. And I remember being really disappointed one time because I was invited to this fellowship of college students, and they had a Lord's Supper, and it was leavened bread, and it was on a Thursday, and I just couldn't bring myself to participate in the Lord's Supper with them because it wasn't on the Lord's Day and it wasn't on leavened bread, which could tell you maybe right there where my mindset was at. I had this desire to connect, but I went to other places and I didn't find anything in the different denominational sort of Christianity that I agreed with, and I really tried that I specifically agreed with. I really tried to see if there was a better church, if there was I definitely looked into lots of different churches, and I couldn't find one that I was like, this is just simply better, or they have better doctrines. I looked into Calvinism. I said, I can't do it. I've been searching into things like that for a long time, and I say I just can't. I can't mesh that with the Bible. I looked into Baptist doctrine, and I don't have much problem with a lot of Baptist doctrine, but there's some things that I'm just like, that seems really, I don't like that, And so I looked into Catholic doctrine, and I found a lot in Catholic doctrine that I loved, and I thought, man, this is great stuff. This high church stuff is definitely my cup of tea in some ways, and in other ways, it just distorts things, and it's so terrible. And I couldn't find anything. I guess you could say I was having a Joseph Smith moment. I don't know, but so basically, what I decided was to go ahead and just use the church that I had. Just keep going to the church I had, and eventually, though, I moved to another Church of Christ because I was going to a different college, and I went to one that was closer to me. And all of a sudden, I realized that what I really needed was sort of a change of atmosphere and to go to this place, because they were so Jesus-centered. They were just so loving, and they were just so, like, they didn't care that they were a Church of Christ. They didn't care that what anyone called themselves. They didn't care whether or not someone was exactly baptized in just the right way and stuff. They had their way of doing things. They didn't care that some churches sang with musical instruments. Oh no. And so I stayed there. And in fact, I'm still there. I've moved around and things and whatnot. And what I've come to realize more than anything, and this is sort of the crux of it all, is that the church really is not an organization. It's not something built by human hands. It's not something that you can point and say, there it is, or there it is. As Jesus says, the kingdom is within us. As Jesus says that he's going to build his church. That doesn't mean he's going to build an organization. That doesn't mean he's going to build a specific church which excludes other churches. And what it means is that Jesus is the one who decides who's in his church, who's not. He's the one who accepts people into his church, and the one who basically is the door to the church. And so with him, you have access to the church. He builds it. If there is a litmus test, maybe the litmus test is that, when Peter made his great confession and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," and Jesus told him, "Upon this rock, I'll build my church." It seems like a pretty good litmus test. Is someone, my brother, did they say that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, or not? And so there's that. And yeah, that's my love for Jesus. He touched me in a personal way. He came to me. He saved me. He put me to work. He said, "I'm not going to let you wallow in your sin. I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you just drown there by yourself." And in some ways, I was not in a church when I had a conversion experience. So I see things maybe a little differently from other people, because I've not met too many people who were alone, or not even alone, in a den of drug users when Jesus appeared, sitting next to other people who were on drugs. And I never met anyone who was like that. I met other people who were, I think, as a story that you say, they were alone, they were praying, and Jesus came to them and touched them in a very special way. He is the Son of God. He is the one, the Messiah, the one who's worthy, and the one who's powerful enough to save us. And I think everything else, if he's resurrected and he can resurrect us, I think everything else is just. So I just want to say that one thing I was thinking about is, who is it that's always trying to say that we're all united? Who is it that's always trying to say, it doesn't matter what church you go to, that really what matters is if you love Jesus. What matters is if you're in His Word, and if you're understanding who He is, and if the Spirit is transforming your life, it's the common people, it's the lay people, it's the people that are on the ground level of, in relationship with Jesus. It happens on the clergy level sometimes, but really it's usually the clergy people that are trying to say, no, it matters very importantly exactly what you believe, and you have to believe exactly the right things, or there are some things that are just so essential that if you get them wrong, you can hardly be called a Christian, or you might not even be able to be saved. And it's the leaders, it's those that have power through the church that they belong to, or make the money from their positions or things like that. They're really invested into their organization. I can say that I still go to a Church of Christ. I can say that whenever people try to say, "Oh, that Church of Christ, they're just they're no good, they're a cult," I could say, well, there probably are churches that could very well be classified as cults. I don't see how that's very relevant. We don't have any specific doctrines that we have to believe. One thing that I like about the Church of Christ and why I still go is that I'm free. I'm free to believe anything I want to believe. I've never been told by a Church of Christ member, that by any leader, by any elder, that I had to believe anything. The only thing they expect is that you'll use the Bible, that you'll read the Bible, and that if you come up with something, it's from the Bible. I've been to too many places where I visited where there's like, well, if you're going to come here, you have to believe these 5 points, or you have to do this or that. And there are churches of Christ that will not accept people. And I want to make that clear. I understand that it does exist. There are churches of Christ that will not accept people who were not baptized at the right age, or in the right way, or by the right method. I don't think there's any that care really who does it. But you understand what I mean, I believe. That's really how I want to leave this. I want to say thank you for this opportunity to share my love for Jesus. If there's anything else, if there's any questions you have, let me know. And hey, God bless you. God bless us all. And I'd love to be in correspondence if there's anything that you need.